And welcome everybody to the Geeking Poetic podcast channel. I'm one of your hosts, Larry Roberts. This jolly little elf over here next to me is none other than
Megan Guess.
And we are here to talk about Christmas-related stuff. It is the time of the year for that. It's hard to believe it's already Christmas time. I feel like we were only just talking about Halloween.
I'm right.
But
it goes so fast.
It does go really fast. So we are going to talk about 5 things that we chose having to do with Christmas. And we've done other top 5 things related to the Christmas holiday in the past.
Yep.
So it gets a little bit tougher each time we do this, but I think the one we came up with this time is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous.
It did prove to be a little dangerous at times. Yeah, definitely a little costly.
Maybe some jail time in there too.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm sure somebody went to jail for some of these things. People at home are like, what are they talking about?
It's Christmas, right?
Right. What we're talking about are Christmas toy crazes of the past. So you might remember that at various Christmases over the decades, there have been certain products that came out that caused a complete frenzy. And not just a frenzy amongst the kids, but
parents too, man. They full on brawls going on, fighting over these toys.
Yeah, exactly. There were some huge incidents that happened in the past. And what we're talking about are our top 5 Christmas toy crazes. Now, there have been many crazes and popular Christmas toys and things that have done very well at Christmas time over the years, but specifically, we whittled it down to the 5 that we felt were, I don't know, the most legendary for one reason or another.
Yeah, they had the most crazy stories that went with them. It was things that, they couldn't keep products on the shelves.
Or they didn't have enough made to begin with.
Right.
Other times it took some very ingenious maneuvers on the part of the manufacturers just to appease these customers at Christmas time. Mm-hmm. So that's the stuff that we're going to talk about here today. We narrowed it down. I'm pretty happy with the 5 that we've narrowed it down to.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it even freaked out the government at one point.
Yeah, it sure did. Oh, and one last thing. Since this channel does tend to cater mostly to people around our age, to be honest with you, so we're looking at toy crazes that happened pretty much between the 70s and the 90s. We know there have been some that have come out in the last several years that were a pretty big deal, but we really don't know too much about that. We're looking at the ones that have just gone down as being legend over the years.
Yes.
So that's what we're focusing on here. And yeah, without any further ado, let's get into those toy crazes.
Coming in at number 5 of the craziest of all crazy toy crazes, yep, that many crazies for sure, is the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. While the concept of taking Japanese children's shows and turning them into TV fare for Western audiences wasn't anything new, it wasn't really until the release of Saban Entertainment's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in the early 1990s that it really became a huge phenomenon with the masses. By Christmas of 1994, the fervor and demand for the Power Rangers toys was so high that the company just couldn't keep up, resulting in Bandai America having to hastily open 11 new factories.
Wow.
Just to try to keep up with the demand. And yet, that still wasn't enough. Toys sold out almost before they even hit the shelves, and parents were waiting in these long lines and pushing each other out of the way to get their hands on that last Green Ranger or that Megazord. As a result, many others took advantage by selling these toys on the aftermarket for 10 times their retail value. And the company had to issue warnings to consumers about all of the counterfeit Power Rangers toys that were being sold by shady copycat manufacturers trying to capitalize on this craze.
Yeah, and I do remember all of those counterfeit toys. There was tons of them on the market that looked pretty close to being a Power Ranger, but you could look at it, any kid would look at it and be like, that ain't the real Green Ranger.
Yeah. I loved the Power Rangers growing up. The TV show, I was anxious to get home and watch them every day after school and everything, but I think I was too old to get into this craze.
Yeah, by that time you were probably a little bit too old. Young enough still, I guess, to enjoy the show, but
right.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have been buying the toys. Well, I remember because I was working in retail at the time, selling toys and stuff, so I remember parents coming in and asking if they could get a Green Ranger or a Red Ranger or a Megazord. At the time, a Megazord was somewhere around $50, I believe, and people were saying, saying, I'll pay $300 for it. I'll pay $400 for it. And I remember being at Toys R Us and KB and seeing people just practically almost trample each other trying to get their hands on Power Rangers toys. It's interesting that you don't hear about this one quite as much anymore, especially compared to some of the other ones on our list. But since I was there and I lived it, I felt like this really needed to be in there because people forget just what a massive phenomenon that was in that Christmas of 1994.
That's crazy.
Well, coming up with number 4 here, we're sticking with 90s toys. Oh, this one's a little bit later in the decade. We're talking about less morphing and more chirping and talking and furriness. Do you know what I'm talking about, everybody? I'm talking about Furby. Okay, so while this next toy wasn't the first electronic talking animal to be a hot ticket at Christmas time, like we all remember the adorable talking Teddy Ruxpin doll from years earlier.
Yes.
It's safe to say that Furby was definitely a unique toy. Not only in how it created such a craze with consumers during that Christmas of 1998, but also with the amount of controversy that this toy wound up stirring up. Tiger Electronics premiered Furby that year, and immediately people were wowed with its strange furry bird-like features and the animatronics and electronics inside of it that allowed the Furbies to communicate, interact, and even eventually learn how to speak human language over time. And this just blew kids away. And a lot of parents realized how cool the Furby was, so they were eager to get their hands on it too. And they tried desperately to get their hands on these things in time for Christmas. As such, nearly 2 million of these Furbies sold just during that holiday season. And the fad didn't fade quickly either, as they continued to sell many millions more over the next year. However, some rumors and paranoia started up about the Furby regarding its ability to learn and listen to people when they're talking, and this caused a bunch of folks out there to believe that the Furby could be used for spying purposes or other nefarious reasons. And at one point, it even caused the US government to get involved and accuse the Furby of being able to do exactly that. And they wouldn't allow them on planes. They wouldn't allow them in offices. They really believed that the Furby could be used for total spying on the government purposes. Now, here's my question. Did you ever own a Furby? Did you have one of those?
I recall playing with a Furby.
Mm-hmm.
I do not recall if I owned the Furby.
Probably not. I wouldn't be surprised if it was owned by maybe like one of your
somebody else,
younger relatives or something like that.
A cousin or somebody.
But there were a lot of adults that bought this Furby because they were just fascinated with it. I mean, by today's standards, this kind of toy almost seems primitive, but back then
it was pretty cool.
It was really, really ingenious. I mean, we hadn't seen anything we could bring home. I mean, Teddy Ruxpin, I loved Teddy Ruxpin, but he just, moved by a cassette tape you put in there. He couldn't learn or anything like that.
Right.
This thing could actually learn how to go from speaking gibberish to speaking English or Spanish or any number of languages they had it programmed to be able to learn. And that was really cool, but yeah, I guess they were a little big for their britches there because next thing you know,
a little too soon.
Yeah, it turned into
weren't ready.
Yeah, it turned into something from Mission Impossible apparently.
All right, coming in at number 3 is he's red.
Mm-hmm.
He's cute.
Okay.
He's furry. He giggles and makes you giggle. It is Tickle Me Elmo. Well, sticking with the whole adorable furry toy fad, next up we have Tickle Me Elmo, a toy that was designed to be able to giggle and speak when squeezed and tickled, and he featured the looks and voice of the much beloved Sesame Street character, Elmo. The toy actually was released during the summer of 1996 and sold moderately well, but when it was featured on Rosie O'Donnell's popular talk show, by Black Friday that November, the demand and craze for this toy just went overboard, with Tickle Me Elmo quickly selling out everywhere. The demand for this toy was so incredibly high that there were regular reports of violence in stores where parents were fighting each other and injuring store employees. It's Sesame, guys! With a frenzied scene that hadn't been seen to this level in years.
Yeah.
And with the initial stock of only 400,000, there just weren't enough available to satisfy the millions of children that were putting Elmo at the top of their Christmas wish list that year.
What in the hell made them think 400,000 would be enough of this, even if it wasn't like a massive phenomenon. That's not much for worldwide. I'm sorry.
No, and I guess maybe Elmo's been out for a while. They didn't expect it to go nuts.
I suppose.
I guess. Reportedly, some parents were paying thousands of dollars to get their hands on one of these things. And Tyco Toys did their best to try to get more made and onto the shelves before the end of the year, ultimately selling around 1 million by the time Christmas was over that year. In addition to making the company lots and lots of money, this also helped Sesame Street to become a very popular property once again after having seen some decline of interest in the past recent years.
Yeah, I remember that point in the mid-late 90s. Sesame Street, I mean, it was still popular, but it wasn't like the rage that it became. Elmo basically totally reinvigorated it.
Saved it, yes.
Exactly. So, man, I remember very clearly when Tickle Me Elmo came out because I was still working in retail. And I had parents coming to me again asking me for those, and people were going nuts for that.
Yeah.
People were getting injured, like seriously injured, fighting each other for these Tickle Me Elmos. That's so completely goes against
Right?
what, the kind of lessons that Elmo and Sesame Street were teaching the kids. But yeah, okay. But yeah, I remember that. Did you have any relatives that had a Tickle Me Elmo?
Again, I think my nieces and nephews wanted them. I don't know if they managed to get one for Christmas or if it had to be much, much later.
Yeah, that was the case of a lot of people, is they weren't able to get their hands. I mean, even with the sped up production that they did at the 11th hour, they still were only able to get like 1 million of them out by the end of Christmas, and they were able to sell many millions more of that.
Bad planning, bad planning.
Yeah, bad touch, bad tickle. Yeah, just no good.
No bueno, guys.
No bueno for Elmo. Whew. So coming in at number 2 of the craziest Christmas toy crazes is a franchise that is very near and dear to my heart. I've talked about it plenty on our channel in the past. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about Kenner Star Wars figures, and most specifically, the first Kenner product that was ever put out related to its very popular action figure line. Except it wasn't actually action figures. So it goes without saying that the Star Wars franchise is one of the biggest and most successful properties released in, well, certainly in my lifetime, probably of all time. And over the years, Star Wars has earned billions and billions of dollars. But when the film first took off like a rocket back in May of 1977, stores and manufacturers were caught completely off guard, and they were unprepared for the kind of demand that came for Star Wars products, especially for those kids that wanted toys. Now, while some games and puzzles and other items were hastily made available to the public, it was clear that most of the kids out there were anxiously awaiting toys, specifically action figures and vehicles that resembled what they had seen on screen. Now, Kenner Toys owned the toy license for Star Wars, but unfortunately, they knew there was no way they were going to be able to get action figures and vehicles and all those toys out on the shelves in time for the Christmas buying season.
Not even close.
No, there was no chance of that. And they were panicking because they realized really quickly that they had one of the potentially most lucrative licenses out there and no real way to capitalize on it. So in a completely unprecedented and bold business move, Kenner decided to release the Early Bird Kit as something they could get on the shelves in time for Christmas shoppers. And ultimately, what you got when you bought this Early Bird Kit was a cardboard box with a certificate promising you that you would get a 4-pack of Star Wars action figures through the mail months later, whenever they were finally ready to be sent out and manufacturing had been completed. And along with the certificate, in that cardboard envelope, there was also a flimsy, thin backdrop kind of action figure stand that you would eventually be able to pose your figures on. And that was it. That was all that came in the package.
Wow, that's some balls right there.
That was very ballsy, and this could have gone sideways for them so fast. But actually, it sold really, really well. People were so desperate and anxious to get their hands on anything.
Buy some cardboard?
Yeah, on anything Star Wars, and they figured, well, getting an official promise on Christmas morning that they would eventually get figures was better than getting no figures at all. And this risky move paid off because months later, once these toys did finally start arriving in kids' hands and showing up on store shelves, kids loved it. They went crazy for these things. And within just the first year, they sold millions and millions of dollars worth of Star Wars toys, eventually resulting in Kenner Star Wars becoming one of the most successful and profitable toy lines of all time. And not only are other vintage Star Wars toys very expensive to buy now for goofy adult collectors like myself, but even getting your hands on one of those original early bird kits it costs thousands of dollars now.
That's insane.
It is insane because we were a little silly, us collectors, you know. But many of us have fond memories of this thing, and this was the launch of the phenomenon that was Star Wars collectibles. Now, I never had the early bird kit that I remember. If I did, I don't remember. I mean, I was fairly young. I do tend to remember stuff like that. I knew other kids that had the early bird kit and eventually got those figures in the mail. But I seem to remember getting my first figures at the grocery store or at the Five and Dime near my house. That was how I first got Star Wars. But I do think it's a really cool concept, and it was so unique for its time. And when people think of those toy crazes and the ones that really stand out and like looming legends out there, the early bird kit story, it ranks right up there. And we find ourselves already at number 1. This is probably not going to be a huge surprise to most people that are familiar with Christmas toy crazes, because I just couldn't think of one that was more legendary and symbolic of the whole topic, because anybody that was around, heck, even people I know that weren't around back then, if you bring this up to them, they know all about it. They've heard about it.
We've all seen the footage.
Yeah, exactly. And what are we talking about?
Cabbage Patch Dolls. Cabbage Patch Dolls were originally created by Xavier Roberts, who initially sold them regionally before Coleco Toys bought the license. And with some redesigning and rebranding, the Cabbage Patch Dolls, as we know them, were born. And they actually were, because they come with the little certificates of birth. Oh, it's so cute.
Wow.
These dolls had such a unique look to them that some felt they were just too odd to have widespread appeal to anybody. But boy, those people were so incredibly wrong.
Yeah.
By Christmas of 1983, these toys became a phenomenon that hadn't really been seen with any other Christmas toy in the past. At least not to this level. As dolls quickly sold out all over the country, parents became frantic and crazed with the pursuit of these things. And the nightly news was regularly reporting about stores being overrun and practically looted by people trying to get their hands on a doll for Christmas.
Man, I remember that so clearly too.
Yes, I remember people jumping over each other.
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah, seriously, with scenes of store employees wielding bats and megaphones trying to keep the crazy crowds from tearing the place apart. By 1984, Cabbage Patch Dolls had earned over $2 billion in sales worldwide. That's what you're missing out on.
Yeah, apparently.
An astronomical number for that time. It's for today's time. That's insane.
That's a lot of money.
The dolls continue to be popular and are still beloved by so many today. Ironically, the various bad business decisions and setbacks wound up causing Coleco to declare bankruptcy, and by 1988, just a few years later, they were completely out of business, and the Cabbage Patch Dolls wound up with Hasbro.
Yeah, that's crazy. You had to really do some bad business maneuvers to be the company that brought out Cabbage Patch Dolls, and only like four or 5 years later, you go down the drain.
Yeah, that's some rough, bad decisions.
Yeah, it's too bad. And Coleco had some cool stuff out there too, besides just Cabbage Patch Dolls.
Yeah.
So I was a fan of the Coleco company. So, but I'm a fan of Hasbro too. They obviously did well, and you can still get Cabbage Patch Dolls now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like
it's still a thing.
I thought that would just be. I really thought that was going to be a passing fad, but it's amazing how that's continued on.
It lingers.
It does linger. And yeah, you still, it's not uncommon at Christmas time to still see those images from what happened. People talk about like all the Black Friday madness that's happened over the years. And like, even then, a lot of that pales in comparison.
Yep, that was the OG right there.
Yeah, that was the OG crazed parent trying to get that perfect present for their kids. So yeah, we had to make number one Cabbage Patch Dolls.
Without
Absolutely.
doubt, yeah.
And that's it for our list. Now, honestly, there's so many other toys that could get brought up because there have been many, many Christmas toy crazes that I don't feel got quite as crazy as these 5 did. But there have been stories about it. I remember Tamagotchi being a really big deal when that came out. You could go all the way back to the 70s. There was one crazy one that it was before your time. But I remember when I was little, there was one Christmas where people just went crazy for the pet rock. It was a rock in a box.
I got a rock.
Yeah, exactly. It was like being like Charlie Brown on Halloween, but you actually wanted the rock. I mean, it was a funny idea.
Is it the Christmas with, like, you get a coal if you're bad, and Cole's like, oh yeah, I don't care. So, okay, here's a rock. I'm like,
yeah.
I like this rock.
I guess.
Is that what happened?
Well, you know, in the 70s, look at me. I mean, you know, I got 70s rock written all over me. So, you know, you'd think I would dig it. But yeah.
Dig the rock.
Oh, wow. But that was a big phenomenon that Christmas. I remember hearing stories. I was too young to know this, but I know people like Brian Heiler over at Plaid Stallions tells the story about how his mother had to deal with crazed parents back in, I think, like 1975 when the $6 Million Man toy first came out. I guess parents were going crazy trying to get that thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was cool because that toy was kind of a trendsetter. Prior to that, there hadn't really been a very successful new toy line that was put out in time to correspond with something that was current and new on the television.
Okay.
Yeah, there had been like Star Trek toys and Planet of the Apes toys, things like that.
They came later, right?
But the toys came way after the properties. So when Kenner came out with that $6 Million Man, that was all the rage. And I had $6 Million Man. I still have him. I love that toy line. Kenner is awesome. They always come out with the good stuff. But I heard stories of people going crazy for those things. So not to the level of Cabbage Patch Dolls, but still pretty kooky. And lastly, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention, even though this isn't specifically just a Christmas craze, but there was a craze for it at Christmas, and it was at the end of the 90s. And do you know what it was?
It's got to be the Beanie Babies.
It was Beanie Babies, yes. Oh my gosh, people were crazy.
Everywhere.
Crazy about those Beanie Babies.
They're kind of like the Funko Pops these days.
Oh, it's way, yeah. I mean, Funko Pops are popular, and we love them. We've talked about those plenty, but
people went crazy for
Beanie Babies. Oh gosh, I mean, there were so many stories of people spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on these things, especially at Christmas time. But the only reason I didn't feel like this belonged in the list was because it was kind of a phenomenon all year around there for
a couple years.
Yeah, for at least a couple of years. But it still was a pretty big deal, especially that first Christmas when those things really blew up big. So, yeah, that's definitely one that I think deserves honorable mention. But, hey, this was fun talking about this stuff. You let us know at home. What did you think of our choices? Do you agree or disagree? Or are there ones that you think stand out even more than the ones that we mentioned here? Make sure you leave a comment below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so that you'll be notified when we have new content like this. We talk about all kinds of stuff from toys to movies and TV, all kinds of fun pop culture things. And we hope to see you back here enjoying it with us again. So in the meantime, if we don't see you, happy holidays, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Do 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 do. Nom nom. Do 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 do.
What's happening?
Do 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 do. Phenomenon.
Oh God. Okay. Bye, everybody.
You pause it.
Yeah.
Stick it back.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. That was so
What am I supposed to do here?
Okay.
Boy, oh boy. What? You know, I don't sit here losing my head laughing at you when you fuck up.